BCX has deep roots in the South African business landscape. For over 40 years, we have strived to develop and implement the technology solutions businesses need to thrive. We have grown, evolved, and spread our wings over the years, evolving from a trusted South African ICT partner into one of the continent's largest systems integrators, a giant in the digital space. BCX is a subsidiary within the Telkom Group and a digital transformation partner for enterprises and public sector organizations in various industries and sectors. We operate across South Africa, Botswana, Mozambique, Namibia, the UK and Zambia. From mining, oil, gas and financial services to commerce, healthcare, telecoms, technology, retail and the public sector. BCX develops and implements the technology solutions that power the South African economy. We connect South Africans to Africa and beyond, securely providing the technology and services that businesses use to create, innovate, and reimagine how they serve their customers. Our cloud computing solutions enable collaborative workspaces, connecting people and things, enabling you to work wherever you are. Big data analytics solutions turn information into knowledge and help you solve your real business problems. We are inspired by our people, passionate about transformation, and committed to our clients and their customers. Reimagine evolution, reimagine excellence, reimagine growth. BCX, giving your business the power to grow.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wired4Women, and on behalf of my fellow Wired4Women Advisory Board members, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our first of our series of masterclasses that we'll be hosting. Our masterclass today focuses on career ownership. Now, the big question is advancement all about corporate politics? I'm afraid pretty much. Women who get to the top are those who navigate politics or use it to their advantage. Some people try to avoid office politics, at all costs. But the reality is that being politically intelligent can prove to be your single biggest determinant as it pertains to your personal and professional success. We continue to learn how to take ownership of our careers and how to be effective and authentic leaders. We do not try to be men at all. We are women who endeavor to use our talents and insights to be the best that we possibly can be. We help to support our businesses as well as the people around us. Excuse, I think it's the snow from yesterday, guys. I'm so sorry. Like, my voice is literally like cracking up and it's not working with me today. Aside from learning how to navigate corporate politics to your benefit, today's masterclass will also discuss the Queen Bee management syndrome that does no one, especially the Queen Bee, any favors. The Queen Bee syndrome is a form of politics akin to gatekeeping. It drives people away and gives them a reputation that can follow them throughout their careers. We're going to unpack the syndrome and give valuable advice on how to overcome it and how to avoid it by all means necessary. I do, of course, do not stand alone, and it is my pleasure to welcome my fellow advisory board member, Mandisa, who will also be providing our sponsor's address today. I'd like to thank BCX for their intentional work around the empowerment of women within corporate South Africa. We are able to host these important conversations because of their incredible support. Mandisa, over to you.
Thank you, Nomonde. And good morning to all on this very cold day. It's very cold here in the studio, so I'm really envying some of you who are sitting at home and, you know, with your heaters and underfloor heating. We're freezing here, but we're going to make it warm. So as Nomonde said, today's masterclass is around career ownership and navigating to the top. And one of the key components of this is navigating through corporate politics and using it to your advantage. I often hear people say that corporate politics is destructive, it destroys morale, it hurts. And some even say corporate politics is not for them. Well, I'm happy to tell you that we need to completely reframe, as Nomonde said earlier, reframe the negative connotations of office politics and view it with different lens. What if it's not about deceit and manipulation, but about relationship, influence, networking, the ability to make a difference, about the good things? Office politics refers to the strategies and relationships individuals such as us use to gain power and influence and achieve our goals within the workplace. It's vital to actually acknowledge the unique challenges us women in the ICT industry face in an industry that has been historically male-dominated. As women, we are not only tasked with mastering technical competencies of our jobs, but also navigating an environment that was not built with us in mind. Therefore, learning to engage effectively in office politics is even more crucial for us. It's about navigating the existing structures with grace while simultaneously breaking down barriers and cultivating a more inclusive space. This isn't about playing the game in the traditional sense, but rather about wielding our unique perspectives and strength to redefine it. We have the power to shape the culture and the norms in our workplace, paving the way for future women in tech to thrive without having to conform or compromise their authenticity. So there are a number of misconceptions that I would like us to navigate through today and debunk some of them. The first one is the misconception that engaging in office politics and being a decent person, those are mutually exclusive. And the answer is no. Good folks such as us do office politics. We're involved in office politics whether we like it or not, consciously or not. The key is to harness it ethically and positively, using it as a tool to advance collective goals and contribute to a thriving work environment. The third misconception is the notion that office politics can be completely avoided. And again, you cannot escape it. I think you alluded to that earlier, Nomonde. The reality is, as long as we interact with others, politics will always be present. We are social creatures, and our interactions inherently involve a degree of influence and power dynamics. The question is not if politics exist, but rather what kind of politics we encourage. In every workplace, just to quote Kamala Harris, she said, in every work environment, there will be politics. If you really want to rise to the top, you need to figure out what the politics in your workplace are. Then you hook it in. You decide what conforms and what does not conform to your personal code. And that was a quote coming from Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. The third misconception, which is one that I personally struggle with, is that office politics will not affect your career progression. The truth is that office politics affects your job performance and career trajectory. Your work, your performance alone will not always speak for yourself. My coach often says to me that, we've got this cultural notion that, we were brought up to say, don't brag about your work. You must let your work speak for yourself. And she always says to me, your work's not going to speak. You need to speak for yourself. So advocating for your work is not bragging. It's illustrating its impact on the organization and showing why it matters and why your seniors should continue investing in it. I would just like to kind of digress a bit and talk about the Queen Bee syndrome. Queen bees destroy bridges instead of building them. This is a phenomenon known as the Queen Bee syndrome in some workplaces. It's a behavioral pattern seen in some women in positions of authority who, rather than mentoring and fostering the professional and advancement of women who work under them, actually inhibit it. It's competitive, similar to gatekeeping, where those in power limit access to resources or opportunities, something that we see in the ICT environment, especially in the male-dominated environment. So ethical office politics is not about suppressing others to maintain personal status and control, but rather about fostering a supportive environment that enables everyone to succeed. It's about building bridges, not walls, and promoting a culture of collaboration and not competition. So what can you do? So how can we navigate office politics positively? Let us reframe how we view office politics. Rather than a negative force, consider it a tool to build strategic relationships, prepare for impactful discussions, and set your ideas up for success. How you approach these activities and the intent behind them is what truly matters. Building strong network is equally important. Your performance is crucial, but without a network of relationships, it may go unnoticed. Develop those connections. They will help you and your work to shine. Lastly, assess your current standing and identify areas of growth. There will be setbacks along the way, but each one offers valuable learning opportunity. Stay true to the values while navigating the space, because that is how you ensure success benefits not just you, but also for your colleagues and the organization as a whole. Remember, if we do not participate in office politics, we risk being sidelined by it. But by engaging in it positively, authentically, and ethically, we can use it as a platform for growth, achievement, and empowerment. So from the mouth of Niven, who's going to be speaking to us just now, there's a quote that I took from you that I really like, that I would like to end my speech with. You said, by painting all political activities with the same brush, we are oblivious to the potential for constructive politics. That is the range of perfectly ethical, appropriate activities that serve to strengthen relationships of support, expand influence, and build a powerful base that allows you and your team to be more effective. Sure. So I thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. So already starting with really, really key nuggets. And I think a key takeaway there is advocating for your work is not bragging. Your lack of participation in politics is participation in and of itself. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in for a treat today, and I truly cannot wait for our masterclass, which is going to be given to us by Niven. Niven has held executive positions since she was 29 in a career that has spanned multiple sectors and roles. Before starting up her own consultancy and embarking on her PhD in organizational behavior, her positions included Chief Executive Officer of the Businesswomen's Association, Head of the South African Reserve Bank Academy, and Head of Leadership and Culture for the Standard Bank Group, the largest bank by assets in Africa. Having started her career as a strategy consultant, she now works as a strategy leadership and culture advisor for global clients in industries as diverse as financial and professional services, retail, media, transport, and manufacturing. Niven is the author of If You Don't Do Politics, Politics Will Do You, is a Harvard Business Review and Inc. contributor, a part-time tutor at Cambridge University Institute of Sustainability Leadership, and has been invited to be a guest lecturer at Stanford University. She's an expert facilitator on women's leadership development programs around the world and serves as the chairman of the board of Kotlins, an NGO that for the past 87 years has done cutting-edge work in the early childhood development sector in South Africa and beyond. I'm sure I speak for our audience here today to say I'm super excited for the insights we're going to be getting from you today. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to Niven.
Thank you, Amanda. And it's lovely to be here and to amplify a lot of the stuff that Mandisa has said. So we have half an hour for me to take you on a whistle-stop tour of politics and the things that in my career I was completely allergic to for the longest time. I wore my refusal to engage in politics really as a badge of honor. And it's a pity, as successful as I was, the challenge is that I actually didn't know what I was talking about when I said I don't do politics. And somebody said to me the other day, well, you know what they say about books, right? And I said, I don't know. What do they say? They say, you write the book you were meant to read. And I said, well, that's very true. Because I wrote the book that I needed to read. I teach about the things I didn't know I needed to know. And really at the heart of everything that I do is trying to bridge the gap between two numbers. So the first one, 79% up on your screen, comes from the Gartner Engagement Survey. It's run annually in organizations around the world of all types at all levels. And every year the result is depressingly similar and familiar. 79% is the result of their engagement survey. And you might be thinking, well, 79% is not too bad. No, let me correct you. 79% is not the level of engagement. It's the level of disengagement that is being found in organizations around the world. And this disengagement can be both passive and active. So passive, you know, we've all heard talk of the Great Resignation. People pitching up at work or sitting at home and just going through the motions of what they're doing. As a friend of mine says, the wheel is turning, but the hamster is dead. So that's one option. But you can also have active disengagement, where people come to work and they actively undermine their team, their manager, their company. I mean, it sounds unbelievably perverse, but it's not something that's unheard of. And I read a study the other day that said in the US, manager or people that were interviewed were asked about foregoing a substantial pay raise. So you could either have a substantial pay raise, and substantial is obviously relative and subjective, or you could see your immediate manager fired. 47% of people said, I'd rather see the manager fired. So we've got something quite broken in organizations, I think, in terms of culture, in terms of reward, in terms of remuneration, in terms of leadership behaviors. And it's amplified. The tragedy of this is amplified by the fact that Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who coined the term flow. So you may not know the term, but hopefully you know the feeling. That feeling of when you're just completely immersed in something. And what you're doing is so fascinating and so absorbing that you actually lose track of time. You lose track of time for a few minutes, a few hours, and you kind of come back from whatever it was you were doing. Be it work, be it exercise, be it something creative and artistic. So Mahai Csikszentmihalyi coined this term, and in his work, he found that 80% of adults, 80% of all of us, if we were to become financially independent, you know, make a great investment, get a bequest, win the lottery, whatever, so that we did not need to work, 80% of us still want to work. Still want to work. We want to contribute our talents. We want to develop our skills. We want to be part of something that matters. And so for me, this is the ongoing dilemma and challenge and opportunity for all of us. How do we bridge this gap between the fact that most of us are wired to want to do something meaningful, and yet the way we have set up organizations in all manner of means makes people just drag themselves through their day, through their work, through their career. There's a problem here, and I think there are many reasons for this, and I see it in the work I do in culture, in leadership, but it's certainly something I see in the work I do around office politics. Because if you don't have the political will to engage in the reality around you, you probably are going to become disengaged. You are probably going to tear your hair out. And so I really want to amplify some of the points that Mandisa made. These are the 5 myths of office politics that I wrote about 2 years ago. It was my first article for the Harvard Business Review, and it really did seem to strike a chord with a lot of people. And these myths are myths that I've realized in my career, reflecting on it. They're myths that I heard coming back at me from delegates all over the world. And they're myths that I have put into the article, not in the book, but I speak about all the time now. So, absolutely, could not agree more. I heaved a sigh of relief when Mandisa spoke because I thought, oh, at least we're on the same page, as opposed to me having to just put on my screensaver expression because I completely disagree with everything she's saying. I completely agree with everything she's saying. This myth, certainly this myth I had for most of my career, of the either or, it's wrong. It's not an either or. It can be. It can be. It doesn't have to be. And I think the biggest reason for the either or is because most of us do not actually understand what office politics are. So this definition is one that I share in lectures, in workshops, and when I ask people for reactions about this definition, which comes from another lovely Harvard Business Review article called How to Play Politics Without Selling Your Soul. The things that strike people about this definition is, oh, first of all, hold on, you know, that's not necessarily negative. The second thing is that people often start to shift in their seats and get a little bit uncomfortable because, okay, I think I do those things. Yeah, that definition about the informal, the unofficial, the behind the scenes efforts. Yeah, I can recognize some of the things I do in that. Oh, for heaven's sake, are you telling me I play politics? Yes, I'm telling you, you play politics. You may not have called it that. You may be doing it for all kinds of virtuous intentions in all kinds of decent ways. But if you are playing it in that informal, unofficial space, you are playing in the political space. As one of my facilitators says beautifully, you know, you've got your job description. There's a lot of white space on that page. There's a lot of white space in your KPIs. It's in that white space where nothing is written that the political starts to come into play. And it reminds me of a billboard I saw years ago in Lagos when I was visiting my sister who was living there, and it was a huge billboard. I was stuck in unbelievably bad traffic, and this billboard says, "You're not in the traffic, you are the traffic," which I thought was genius and exactly right. It's the same with politics. You are in this one way or another. Because essentially what we're talking about here is a kind of currency, a kind of capital. But it's not the currency and capital that we're used to in terms of money. It's a relational capital. It's a political capital that comprises four things. Firstly, exactly as Mandisa said, your strategic relationships. Who do you know and who knows you? And beyond that, not just who knows you, but who's prepared to support you. And this doesn't only have to be people who are more senior to you. Lateral support can be just as powerful. Downward support can be just as powerful. That's a whole long story. So it's about your strategic relationships. It's about your power. Where you sit in the organogram generally does correspond to your power. I mean, you've got higher decision-making authorities, you've got larger spans of control, you've got larger budgets, the more senior you are. But it's also about influence. And influence doesn't sit anywhere on an organogram. Who actually makes things happen? Who is listened to? Who is consulted? Who gets informed first? And then lastly, it's about your reputation, your brand. What are you known for? Are you known for being the drama queen? Are you known for being the person that people go to make things happen? Are you known for the person who makes things more difficult than they should be or more fabulous than you thought they could be? All of these things reinforce each other for better or for worse. And the more you have of these, the more political capital you have. The more political capital you have, the more you can get things done. And exactly as Mandisa said, it's not just about you, it is about your team, it is about your stakeholders. And frankly, you know, you can choose to ignore everything that I'm saying, everything that we're saying. This is your life, your career. Make the choices you think make sense. But I implore you, when you make those choices, for heaven's sake, know what you are talking about. And not getting involved in politics because you think it's not that important. Well, you know, all teams, all departments, all organizations have got two sides to them. Of course, they've got the formal side, the delegations of authority, the things that you see in the annual reports, in the job descriptions. Those things are real and they matter. But just as real, just as important, is the informal. And frankly, if you only take your lead from and only operate in the formal space, well, it's like playing soccer on half the field. It's Wimbledon, tennis on half the court, rugby on half the pitch. You're putting yourself and your team at a huge disadvantage. Also, to amplify what Mandisa said, the second myth I came up with was this fantasy, and it's a fantasy that you're going to avoid politics. No, okay? Telling me that your organization is political is like telling me that water is wet. Yes, of course it's political. Your family is probably political. I have a friend who was a church minister and for 10 years led a congregation. She left to go to corporate. So nervous about corporate politics. After a few months, she said, oh man, these guys are beginners compared to church politics. So absolutely, the quote from Bowman and Deal is one that I include often. It's not whether organizations will have politics, but what kind of politics they will have. And so you really need to understand that what kind of political environment you're walking into matters. And there's a spectrum of normal here. There's a spectrum of inevitable here. Minimally, moderately, highly politicized environments. Large organizations, old organizations, matrixed organizations, you can practically guarantee they're going to be highly politicized. And so when people say to me that politics are a symptom of a bad culture, no, bad politics are a symptom of a bad culture. But politics are a part of every culture. These are normal. These are inevitable. What is not normal? Sadly, I think what is becoming more common, but is still not normal, is pathologically politicized environments. This is when we talk about toxic environments. And I'm starting to get concerned that people throw the word toxic out quite loosely and quite freely. Toxic is very particular. Toxic is a synonym for poison. What is poison designed to do? To kill you. And when I say that these environments will kill you, I am not speaking metaphorically. I am not engaging in hyperbole and exaggeration. I am speaking literally. The toll that these environments will take on you, because they are environments of constant, unrelenting fear. Fear of being sidelined, fear of being humiliated, fear of being ostracized. If you're in an environment like that, the stories that I've heard through the years of lecturing, the stories I've seen in my own career, are frankly heartbreaking. And my advice to you is, if you are in that kind of political environment, that's not normal. 3 words: run like hell. And when I said this in a workshop a while ago, a woman said to me, I hear you, but I cannot afford not to work. I am the breadwinner in my family. And you know, that may be true of many people listening in. And I hear her. What I said to her was, exactly and precisely because you are the breadwinner, you can't afford not to work, I agree. But if you stay in this job for much longer, you will not be able to work. And then the problem really becomes quite difficult. So before your confidence and your competence is entirely destroyed, which is what an environment of abuse does to people, I implore you, please start to look around for other options. It is not you, it is the environment, and you need to get out. The third myth, absolutely. If we had more time, given that this is an IT audience, I'm sure many of you know the blockbuster Netflix story, or think that you do. I thought I did. I've worked in strategy my whole career. No, you know, Blockbuster was this strategically obsolescent dinosaur, didn't see technological change, didn't see Netflix coming. Nonsense. That's actually not what happened. It was power and politics. If you want, I can send you the slides and the case study that I've put together. But in summary, what I'm saying, what Kathleen Kelly-Reardon is saying, what all the research in my PhD is saying, is that it is all politics. It is not enough to work hard and to have talent. I'm not saying that hard work and talent are not necessary. Of course they're necessary. But I'm saying what Kathleen Kelly-Reardon is saying, what I think our panelists are saying is, it's not enough. And we can have a long, fat conversation over a bottle of wine, maybe 2 bottles of wine, about how the world should be and how in an ideal world these things would be enough. Absolutely. I am not a cynic. I don't wake up in the morning to bemoan the state of the world. But I'm also not a raving idealist and this wide-eyed, naive youngster. Somewhere in the middle is pragmatism. And in this world, this world that we do want to be better, but that we also have to accept where it is. In this world, your technical skills are not enough, particularly the more senior you get. And I often see, particularly women, having what I call a but problem. Not a B-U-T-T, a B-U-T. They have the technical skills, but they don't have the relational skills. They want to make things happen, but they don't want to get involved in the politics. They see the change that needs to be implemented, but they don't have the right person supporting them. Or worst case scenario, they have the wrong person against them. The moment you flip those buts to ands, let me tell you, something fundamental starts to shift, and quite powerfully. Fourth myth, didn't we all have fantasies? Well, I don't have to put on makeup, I don't have to deal with the traffic, and oh, hallelujah, virtual environments. I'm on Zoom for 2 years. I don't have to deal with office politics because I'm not in the office. What a joy, what a bonus. Wrong, okay? Decisions around secondments, around bonuses, around promotions, around retrenchments, around all manner of things. These decisions are still being made. And it doesn't matter if they were being made or are still being made in a virtual room or a real room. And so one of the most important pieces of advice I got in my career, and it's advice I'm giving you, is that some of the most important decisions of your career are going to be made when you are not in the room, whether that room is real or virtual. And so who is in that room for you and what are they saying? That is a function of your political capital. I also strongly recommend you go watch Carla Harris's TED Talks, about 15 minutes, where she talks about getting people to be in the room for you. It's a wonderful talk, 15 minutes of your life, very well spent. A delegate said this at a workshop a while ago when I was talking about this. She'd been one of those people who'd been a circle on a screen on virtual meetings for 2 years, hadn't maintained her relationships, hadn't built relationships, hadn't picked up the phone to have the conversations before the meeting, after the meeting, because, well, you know, it's virtual, nothing really is happening. We had a long conversation about it, and at the end, she looked at me, she looked at the other delegates, and she said, you know what, this stuff hasn't disappeared, but I've disappeared. I thought that was a profound insight. And the last one is this idea that it's a trait, it's something you're born with. No, absolutely, some people will find this stuff more obvious, more easy, more natural than other people will. No question. But for most of us, the majority of people I've ever worked with, lectured to, or engaged with, this is a skill that you have to learn. This is something that if you want to learn, if you see the importance of it, you can and you will. So those 5 myths for me are absolutely critical. Because if you're headlong into these myths, you're going to have zero political will. Of course, you're not going to want to engage in this stuff. But if you can start to crack those myths, or at the best, bust those myths, well, then hopefully you're starting to get some energy and rolling up your sleeves to say, okay, I get this, I understand this, now what? Well, now what is all around your political skill. And I have tons of videos on my website, a workbook that you can download for free, where you can work your way through some of these skills and how good or how bad you are at the moment relative to where you want to be and where you should be. And so the first thing around political skill, and the last thing, and everything in between, is that it is always about people. I mean, I really do find it hilarious that we talk about human resources. When did people become resources? People are not resources, they're also not capital. They are the source of every single thing, good, bad, ugly, magnificent, that is going to happen in your team, in your career, in your life. How are you thinking about the people that form your strategic relationships, that form your tribe, that form your network? How are you thinking about your stakeholders? I include a story in my book about an incredibly interesting woman. She was in her early 40s. She was in the top 6, so she was on Exco of a company with 60,000 people. Very successful, very well regarded, very impressive. And you know, you don't have to be an exco to be successful. We all have very different definitions of what success is. For her, that was her version of success, and in that version, she was astonishing. And she told me a story just in passing that made me suddenly understand a whole bunch more about how she'd gotten to be where she was. And she said that every month, from the moment she started her career, so as a young grad, 20, 25 years before, she would sit at the beginning of that month and she would think, who are the people I need to have a conversation with? Ask for advice, give information to, get information from. In other words, she mapped her stakeholders, and every month she would then deliver against that map. And the next month she'd start again, and she'd do it again, and she'd do it again, and 25 years later she was still doing it. So this was not an afterthought. This was not something she got to when her inbox was empty, in other words, never. This was a practice and a habit that built her and built her network and built her career for years. The second thing is really understanding that when it comes to work, what is the point of work? The point of work is to get things done. So if at work we make friends, well, that's wonderful. I have made some deep and lasting, incredibly precious friendships through my work, but it is not the point of work. To get things done, in fact, friends, the people who unconditionally support you, kind of like your dog, kind of like my mother who thinks I can do no wrong. Friends are not what you need. And you've probably got fewer friends at work than you think. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's not the point of work. You've also probably got far fewer enemies than you think. People who are unconditionally, no matter what you do, against you. Most of the people at work are sitting in the much more nuanced, much more interesting space of being allies or adversaries. They are conditionally for or against you. Do you understand their conditions for supporting you? Do you understand why they're not supporting you? Are you remotely curious? To ask and to find out. I have a mentor who always speaks beautifully about quiet your cleverness, Niven. It's great advice. How many times do we ask, listen, get curious, as opposed to assume we know the answers and that everyone sees the world the way we see it? And so breaking news for those of you who, like me, were taught by your parents, treat others the way you would like to be treated. Wrong. Actually, when it comes to work and politics and relationships, we need to be treating people the way they want to be treated, which means asking how they see the world and what matters to them. Doesn't mean we'll always be able to meet their conditions, but asking is a brilliant way to start to build relationships. And then the last one is really stay focused on what matters. We are bombarded at the moment, in this country, in the world, at this time, with all manner of things that are demanding our attention. I mean, yesterday it was snow. Today, who knows what it's going to be. We leave our house, we run a gauntlet of all kinds of things that are breaking down, all kinds of things that are desperate. And when your energy is dispersed a millimeter in a million directions, it's very difficult to stay resilient. It's very difficult to be effective. So stay focused on what matters. Stay focused on the things that give you energy, that build you, that support you and nurture you, as opposed to being distracted in a million ways by the million things that are asking for our attention. And with that, let me give you one lesson. I have got a few, but let me give you the most important lesson about how not to drive your career off of a cliff. Einstein was apparently asked once, what's the difference between genius and stupidity? To which he apparently replied, genius. Well, genius has its limits. In other words, the ways that we can be stupid are infinite. There are no limits. Let me give you one example of how you can drive your career off a cliff politically. And that's when you become the problem, capital letters. You matter. What you're trying to achieve in your life and your career matters. But organizations are not democracies, they're not fair, and they're certainly not all about you. When you cannot get over changes that are happening, You need to decide whether you still want to be part of an organization. And if you do, then becoming the problem and making it all about you means that fantasies are going to start to happen in the minds of those people who are having to interact with you, engage with you, deal with your drama, deal with the fact that you can't get on with things. And those fantasies are not pleasant fantasies in terms of your future. They're fantasies about how much easier their life would be if you were gone. So in your political strategy workbook, which again you can download for free from our website, the first question I ask you in that strategy: are you becoming the problem? And then, like a game of Monopoly, do not pass go, do not collect 200 Rand, sort that out. Nothing else matters. And then lastly, you know, the what of politics, the so what of politics, of course they matter. Busting these myths, developing your skill. But now what? What do you do with this? And what you do with this is you craft a strategy. And all strategies are contextual, and all strategies depend on many things. So they depend on you understanding the landscape. They depend on you thinking about yourself and what you want. And really there's 5 steps. What do you want to achieve? How many times I sit with people and they don't know. What do you want out of this quarter? What do you want from this project? What do you want at this time in your career? What do you want from this company? What do you want? And then how are you going to get there? Thinking about that, understanding what leverage you have, what skills you have that are unique, that are special, that are in demand, that you can use, what relationships you have that can support you, what relationships you have that are against you, and then all the way through, using your energy wisely. Strategy is about focus. Strategy is about clarity. Strategy is about commitment. And so your strategy to your own political advancement, exactly as Mandisa said, not just for your own sake, but for the sake of your team, this cannot be underestimated. And so we have a video, or I have a video, which unfortunately we can't play, but it's from The Office, where one person asks the other person, what's the best piece of advice I've ever given you? He gets the answer, don't be an idiot. When I think of something and doing something, I think, would an idiot do this? And if they would, I do not do that thing. This is my plea to you. Don't be an idiot around this stuff. I was an idiot for most of my career. I was hugely successful, despite being an idiot. But trust me, there were times that were painful, and there were times where I could have been more successful. Don't fall into the myths of politics. Don't see this as an either or, black or white, good or evil. Don't ignore the skills and think that you just don't have the personality or the aptitude. If it matters, you can develop them. And for heaven's sake, don't drive your career off of a cliff. Live to fight another day. Thank you.
Sure. Yo. I don't know about you, but like so many key insights, I've been trying to take down as many as I can. But thank you so very much. And I think you left us as a punchline. Don't be an idiot. And don't drive your career off a cliff. I have quite a few comments that have actually come through from the audience. So before we actually jump into our panel, I'd like to encourage everyone who's online. We would like for this to be collaborative. So please feel free to share any questions, any comments. I have received some already, but perhaps maybe let me just start with the first one that I got here. Good day to the presenters. My name is Nozi Pokumete. What an insightful discussion. This is educational and therapeutic to some of us that have been on the receiving end of office politics. Thank you, Niven. This is necessary education to all of us in the corporate world. Can we please have your presentation shared if possible? And then I do have questions, and I think I'll start with the ones that have come through from the audience for you specifically. The question here is around, do we keep running from toxic environments? When does it get better? And this is a question for you from Mokhadi online.
Yeah, so a great question, Mokhadi. Listen, I've wrestled with that because I've been in one toxic environment in my career, and it was excruciating. I think the one benefit from it is I now have a level of empathy, not just sympathy, but empathy for somebody who's in a toxic environment. Because I think if I hadn't gone through that experience, I would have probably thought, come on, it's not that bad. Come on, get your act together. Where's your backbone? Where's your sense of agency? Trust me, it can be that bad. It will be that bad. I mean, it got to the point where I was coming home and my partner was saying, there's 3 of us in this relationship because you are so angry, you are so disgusted that you're coming home and vomiting this all up and it's eating you up. So I think, you know, when you are in a truly toxic environment, and I thought about what I did in my environment a lot. What else could I have done? What should I have done? I went to the CEO 3 times. 3 times to say what was going on. The first time I got sympathy and I got listened to. That's terrible. The second time, you know, are you sure? The third time, I was becoming the problem because I was talking about things that frankly, when somebody is an abuser, when they are a narcissist, when they are a psychopath, and I'm not making clinical definitions here or diagnoses here, people who are abusive are incredibly good at managing upwards. They're incredibly good at managing impressions that they're the ones who are just trying to make things happen and everyone else is a problem. I went to a coach, I went to the whistleblowing hotline, I even spoke to a colleague of mine who's got a PhD in corporate bullying. All of the research says that it's very unlikely you are going to change somebody who is doing this. But that said, if you keep ending up in toxic environments, then perhaps there's something you're not learning here. You're not understanding. Because, you know, I've had a career of 25 years. I've only ever seen one toxic environment, and now I know the warning signs, and I will not go into another one. So, repeatedly finding yourself in that environment so that you repeatedly have to run, that's a problem. You know, what is it that you need to understand here, change here, ask about here that you're not getting right yet?
Do you think, this was also a follow-up question around, do you think it has sometimes does it have something to do with the culture of that business and organization, if it permeates beyond just one individual?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, in all the work that I've done on culture, the reality is all cultures will have subcultures, for better or for worse, right? So you can have an overall healthy culture, and then you can have pockets of real dysfunction. That's likely to be picked up at some point, and the system's going to have an antibody reaction, an allergic reaction, and those people will probably be asked to move or gotten out. But you can also have an overall very unhealthy culture, and you can have a few pockets of managers who are trying desperately to build and maintain islands of sanity and protect their people. They're probably not going to be able to do it forever. And so I think, particularly for women, when we are responsible for people below us, we want to protect them. And when there's toxicity, we try to make it better. I know that that's what I was doing for 8 months, desperately trying to protect my team. And eventually, I think that the advice that we get in the airplanes is the same here. Put on your own oxygen mask before you can help anyone else. It's not because you don't care about people. You can't help them when you are being crushed under the weight of this.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. I just, before we are, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move into another very exciting part of our discussion today, which is our panel. But before we do, these post-presentation nuggets that actually came out from what you discussed, would you be able to share insights with us with regards to what tactics would you first use to minimize an adversary? You actually spoke a lot about understanding the importance of who your adversaries are, who your allies are within an ecosystem. Yeah. And it really is about like what people expect, not necessarily needing to be liked by everyone. So what do we do in an instance like that? Do we confront the adversary? Do we dig deeper to understand what I could be doing wrong to the opposition?
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think that's such an important question, and the answer is difficult, because would that it were that people and systems and relationships were an Excel spreadsheet. Bing, 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 enter, answer. You know, but that's the reality here. It depends. It depends, and it is contextual. So who are your adversaries? Why? How you find that out might need to be subtle and behind the scenes with conversations. It might be so overt you've got no escaping it. Engaging with it, like I did once with an adversary, I said, what exactly is going on here because we are not getting on, was the best way to tip that relationship. And then we ended up getting on really well because we were both quite blunt and quite direct. With another adversary, that's going to potentially tip them into enemy space. And so, you know, this is both the challenge and the opportunity, is to really understand people and what's going on, takes work, takes effort, takes looking beneath the surface, takes asking, takes not always taking things at face value. And a delegate said it to me once in a workshop. It was hilarious. She said, "Oh, Niven, this is a lot of work." And I said, "Yes, it is a lot of work, but frankly, especially the more senior you become, this is the work. The people below you are doing the technical work. You're navigating the landscape."
That's so true. Final question before I share the load of the questions today. Dogs might be friends, but they still bite, even when they actually love you. So what kind of body language do you look for to identify who is truly authentic and who is actually being a friend or an ally and who's playing games?
Yeah, look, I think body language is an important data point, but I think there's plenty more. It's the same as what Ralph Waldo Emerson said so beautifully. What you're doing speaks so loudly, I can't hear a word you're saying. So how are people supporting you or not supporting you? In the meeting, having your back, outside the meeting, not. Before the meeting, saying that they're going to be on your side, and in the meeting, being trip still. You know, I mean, the examples are endless. So yeah, I'm not an expert in body language. I think there's a wealth of information you can probably glean from body language, but it's much more than that. It's the whole tenor and nature of the relationships and what people are doing relative to what you expect them to do, what they say they're going to do, what you think they should do. Put all those data points together, you get a much richer picture.
Thank you very much, Niven. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now moving into the next part of our discussion today, which is our panel discussion. I am joined by Hope, who is the Chief Human Resource Officer for BCX. Hope is a behavioral specialist who is trained as a psychologist and executive coach. She has garnered extensive experience in human resources, organizational development, culture transformation, team leadership, and individual development. A sought-after speaker, she's a visionary with a wealth of knowledge in change, diversity, as well as women in technology. I'm really looking forward to getting your insights today. This is truly going to be an exciting conversation. I'm also joined by Gilebogile, who is the technology business partner for Contact Logistics DP World, Sub-Saharan Africa. Gile has extensive executive experience in the information management field with blue chip companies in both South Africa and globally. Her depth of skills includes people management and building diversity within teams. I am going to start with you, Hope, this morning. Niven talks about employees becoming a problem. Where's your starting point to address problem employees as well as their line managers?
You know, I'll say organizations are anchored around a purpose, strategy, and those give birth to policies and practice. And that's always a good starting point. What do we stand for as an organization? And that translates into our behavior. And therefore, when there's a problem, it's a good starting point because what you want to ensure is that there's equity and fairness in the system and that all parties feel that they were fairly represented, fairly given a chance to air their views and talk about the issues. So going back to that, and if I take to one of the things that you mentioned, Niven, when you choose an organization, you choose the practice and the policies that they come with. You choose the strategy and the culture that it comes with. It might not always be what you like, but it comes with that package of this particular organization stands for this. And in there, those are the guardrails to ensure that there's therefore fairness and equity. If I look at employment equity, they've taken it a step further to talk about microaggressions. You were talking about the body language, and they've extended it to that to say you can actually reprimand people for the microaggressions and the behaviors that you pick up in meetings or when you're engaging with people. And that's a good starting point.
Thank you very much, Hope. Gil, I have a question for you. Because you're in the tech sector, I think it's only fair to pose this to you. IT people such as engineers and technicians have long been perceived as being reclusive and happiest behind computers versus extroverts and being politically motivated. Now, in order for let me not say them, I must say us, because I'm also in the sector, so it's only fair. In order for us to progress into being leaders, it seems less about the merit of our technical capability, but more around the soft skills like empathy, good communication, and the art of persuasion and political savviness. What is your views on this, and can you actually give us a comment? Do you honestly believe that we have a natural disadvantage of progression if we don't develop these skills?
Noms, yes, It's amazing because I was having a similar conversation with my team yesterday of IT professionals. And I was saying to them, over time, I have learned that if you are not visible, you're sitting behind a computer all the time, you will not, unfortunately, progress in the corporate space. I think for me, because I've worked in different industries, I've seen it all, right? I started off as a consultant at SAP Africa. People I know follow me on LinkedIn. I was a BI consultant, always sitting behind the computer, doing some configured stuff, and you would work in different projects with people coming from different organizations, and you will see your peers progressing faster. Whether they become a team lead, depending on how long the project is, of course. They become a team lead, they become different things, and you're still sitting and then you're doing work and you're asking yourself, am I not intelligent enough for what is happening here? And that's exactly what I've learned over time, that we are human beings and we need to interact with human beings to be seen and to get elsewhere in life. Otherwise, you're going to remain where you are forever.
Very true. Very true. Hope, I have a question from our audience online. Some staff make the environment toxic. However, they are the ones who stage a silent protest. How do you make the company see these bad elements, and how do you then manage them?
Similar to what we are saying, that human beings are complex. Again, in there, you are dependent on people speaking up. You are dependent on creating an environment where people are allowed, or rather encouraged, to speak without fear of reprisal. And taking action as an organization, I think the more action you take in a positive way, in a way that is aligned to what you stand for, your purpose and your culture, the more people see that actually, if I bring more to the party, there is consideration for the challenges that I've brought on. I'm listened to, compared to what you were saying earlier, that, after 3 tries, you realize that this is not going anywhere. So it doesn't matter if I raise it or not. So as organizations, I think we have a responsibility to respond and show that we are aligned with the culture and the purpose that we say we stand for. And again, I would encourage people that the more people speak up, and if we talk to, they're looking for allies, enemies, and so forth, there's somebody in the system that probably will listen. There's somebody in the system who's probably your support system, whether you know it or not, and they're able to advocate for you. And it's in creating a lot of those pockets that we can create a movement that drives engagement and resolution positively.
Thank you very much, Hope. The next question is for everyone on the panel. So, Nvin, we'll start with you. Over your career, do you have any notable Queen Bee experiences, and how do you deal with them? This question actually comes up quite a lot, because whenever we have conversations, we're always asked about how female leaders are often the worst kind of leaders to actually work for, which is an indictment, and it's so unfortunate, and it hurts often, when you hear a lot of other females say that they don't enjoy working for other women because they don't feel like they progress, and they always just being hammered downwards. And I think it's important to actually have shared experiences of how you may have overcome experiences like that, if you have come across that.
Yeah, look, I have had very interesting experiences with women, and working with women and leading women. When I was the CEO of the Business Women's Association, I was so young, and those women were unbelievably supportive and nurturing, and just wanted to see me succeed. And it was the most fabulous experience of the best of what women can be. And really taking someone, I would not have hired me to be CEO of that association. How they gave me a chance is beyond me, but they did, and they supported me in the most astonishing ways at a very early stage in my career. And we had incredibly senior women. Mrs. Mbeki would invite you to the budget speech and the opening of Parliament, and there were Harvard delegations, and all the women would be going to that. So it was at an incredibly senior level, and I was completely out of my depth, at least for the first year. By the time I left, I think I was a very good CEO, but I did not know what I was doing in the beginning, and they supported me. And, I think in my experience, when women, a group of women become dysfunctional, it's incredibly unpleasant. Let's really be clear, anyone can be dysfunctional, any team, any gender. So the psychopath that I worked for was a man. He was dreadful. He continues to wreak havoc in organizations across this country. But in my experience, what I find particularly disappointing is that when women are dysfunctional, there's a level of personal attacks, there's a level of, frankly, bitchiness that I don't see when a group of men are dysfunctional. I mean, you see other dysfunctions. And that I find distressing, because women at our best, and that support and that having each other's back and looking out for each other, it is one of the most empowering things you can have. But when we become dysfunctional, gosh, it's personal. I mean, it really becomes under the skin.
Right. I hope.
It's hard, right? I think we must
Very
also
hard.
acknowledge that it's hard
Yeah.
working in that type of environment. But I always fall back to, as human beings, what we all want is to succeed. So somewhere in there, and I think when it's not pathological, when it's difficult, but it's not overstepping the bounds too much, you can always revert back to, we all want to succeed. So even that person, they want to show up for the best. They want to be seen as effective, efficient, competent. Usually they want to be seen as the most intelligent in the room. And finding ways for both of us to succeed. Finding ways, because I also want my project to be approved. So if I can position the work in such a way that you see how you look good, and in the process you're also approving the things that I want done, then we kind of find a way of navigating it. But it does mean that I constantly am working on tactics to get you to that point. I'm doing what that lady was doing every month. Every so often, you're doing a map of, are we aligned, are we not? What do I bring in to make sure that we are moving forward in a way that can advance me and my career, or in a way that I show up as competent and as effective that as much as I want as well, without being overshadowed but by what you're trying to do.
Thank you very much, Mokele.
Look, I think for me, it's sure, the most hectic thing I've ever experienced, Noms, is when people sabotage you for something that they don't want, for a position that they have not applied for a position that they probably don't want, because I guess we all have choices in terms of whether you apply for something or not. And people often, especially as women, almost, everything is about, it's because Kele knows Mandisa, that's why, Mandisa is pushing Kele on this thing. And people are quick to say that without even knowing you, for that matter, and speculating that I know Mandisa. Meanwhile, I don't. I have not met Mandisa before, right? And those are the things that really make you strong. And those are the things that really make you push harder so that people can see how competent you are as an individual. But truth of the matter is, it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. You wish you don't see them again. And unfortunately, the IT space is quite small. You will definitely see each other again. But life goes on.
Sure. And it is a small world.
Yeah.
If we could all just practice kindness, kind of like amplify each other instead of trying to bring us down, because there isn't enough room specifically for women within the tech space to actually bring one another down. And this actually applies to all racial demographics. So Black women, Indian, colored women, there aren't enough of us sitting at the table for us to actually be able to amplify bad behaviors when we actually see them. So I'm sorry for that experience, Gillian. I hope that you're able to find a way to still get on, and that at some point they apologize for that.
Yeah.
I do have audience questions here. I'll bring one to you, Hope, and then Vin, I'm going to pass the next one to you. How do you play office politics without being seen as trying too hard to fit in?
Yeah, ne? And in there also find without losing yourself. I think one of the things, active listening, really listening to and doing a check of what is going on in your environment, what is important, what are the important decisions that need to be made, who are the important people that are making those decisions, and observing and using those insights to kind of create your own radar. And therefore, how am I able to advance this in that ethical and responsible way, without losing myself and without looking like, I think again, one of those things where Mandisa said, as females and we are raised to not brag. I think some of this is also just we are too modest. And we do need to talk about the work that we're doing. But in working with others, in collaborating and in advocating for others, and also knowing your environment and the timing of what you need to push at what time, I think it enables you to not come across as if you are a show off. And if I also compare to guys, I don't think we'll ever cross the threshold. Hey, those people can apply for a job that they know they don't even have the skills for, but they'll go for it. So I think whatever we try, we will never go overboard. We need to start and do more of it.
You're right. I think it's just to trust ourselves more, right?
Yes.
Same way, just lean into what men do and try and actually make sure that we put our hands up for
Yes.
things
And
that
get
we know.
feedback. And get feedback. I think one of the things that we don't do much in corporate is eye contact. If you really make eye contact, you'll therefore see whether it's landing or not, whether you're losing people or not, and that's important.
As simple as that, eye contact. There's a comment that came through from Mpo. Changing my perspective on corporate politics completely altered my approach to my work. It helped me become more strategic about who and what I spend my energy on. And that's actually a point that you made earlier. Like, make sure that you understand what you're spending your energy on. Is it actually going to yield results for you or not? A question here that's come through from Nozipho Kumete. How much does the type of work you do influence the office politics consequences on one's experiences? Niven, can I pass that one to you?
I'd love to answer, but I'm not entirely sure I understand the question.
I think perhaps, and Nozipho, I hope that I'm not understanding you incorrectly. The type of work that I do on a daily basis, how can that
The professional
influence-
work.
Yes, the professional work. How can that influence the politics around me? So for instance, we've given an example before the question to Gil around when I'm a technologist, can I actually affect politics or not if I'm always behind my computer? And how do I then engage with it in my respective ecosystem?
Yeah, okay. So I think it's a number of things probably then. Look, the kind of people that are attracted to certain kinds of work generally have a certain personality type. So I do a lot of work with insurance companies, and I always joke with the actuaries, yeah, you're the guys who didn't have the personality to become accountants. They find it very funny. I mean, they keep asking me back. So I think, but we're talking about deep specialists. I imagine IT people are similar to engineers as well. Deeply skilled, highly analytical people, generally. But that's a stereotype, So I think the nature of your industry, the nature of your environment, the nature of your personality, the nature of the work that you do, yes, I mean, these are all things you need to consider. But I suppose there's two things that I really want to stress. The one is what I often talk about, which is amplifying the point that everyone else is making, that invisible contributions have no value.
Sure.
Invisible contributions have no value. They might have moral value, spiritual value, and these are not insignificant values. But from a political point of view, your work doesn't speak for itself, people speak. Exactly right. I think the second thing is, the conversation is touched on authenticity, and it often does, and I think it's particularly an issue for women, this, I want to be my authentic self. Well, I urge everyone, especially people who are listening in, to read The Authenticity Paradox by Erminia Ibarra. It's a Harvard Business Review article, came out a few years ago, 2 or 3 pages. And she makes the most profound point, and I think the most incredibly interesting insight, that actually sometimes feeling fake can be a sign of our growth. When you are trying something new, when you are learning to be something different that is required now in a new role, of course you're going to be fake because you're figuring it out. Of course it's not going to be authentic because it's not natural yet. But how many times we can use authenticity as an excuse to stay stuck? That's not who I am. That's not what comes naturally to me. Well, of course that's not who you are yet. That's not what comes naturally to you yet. But if that's what's needed, authenticity is not the gold standard here. Growth is.
Sure.
And in that growth, you're going to feel like an imposter. You're going to feel inauthentic because you're developing.
Sure.
Don't use authenticity as an excuse to stay stuck.
Yo, I love that.
It's a great article.
Sure. Okay, but also what you just said, I think we need to all read that.
Yes,
you know,
everyone.
article. So growth is when you are uncomfortable sometimes. And the standard should not always be striving for authenticity, because in your quest of discomfort, you become authentic eventually when you grow into yourself. That is some powerful insights. I'm not keeping up with all these notes. I would, I hope we are recording this so I can, re-listen to this. There's a comment that's come through. As a woman, I find that I work better with men than women due to what someone once defined as the crab effect. When you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket and one starts to find a way out, the others will pull her back rather than pushing her forward. We still have a way to go in South Africa and probably the world where people don't view successful women in an organization as someone that did unthinkable things to progress, but that it is due to her skills, knowledge, and capabilities. We have to change this. Fair point, and thank you for sharing that. I hope a comment that's come through for you from Impo. Hope is so right. Sometimes we are too modest. I think a lot of it is driven by women being taught to be polite or subservient. I think there are eloquent ways to share your successes. And Manisa, I'm going to pull you in. I have to, because you spoke about this quite eloquently earlier around you talking about your success or the things that you've done, like in your role, is by no ways showing off. How else are people 3 levels above you supposed to know how incredible you are in order to speak of you in rooms that you may not be in? Your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think in terms of getting people that are above you, especially if you're in a low level, is really just to build your allies around you, allies across your business units. And those allies will be able to talk about your work as well. And I find that also you have to build a very close relationship with your line manager, that your line manager actually wants to brag about you, to brag about your good work. And it's really about building a tribe around you. So I think the example that you gave about that, that girl who on a monthly basis makes a point of speaking to a number of people, stakeholders. It's the same way that you can. So it's not really about the work that you deliver on a daily basis, but having people that will be able to talk about you behind those closed doors. I always say you have to have I love talking about having to have a board of directors, having a coach, having a mentor, and having a sponsors. Your sponsors, to me, are your allies. And those are the people that will elevate what you're doing. And the last point is really about everything that you do have to have excellence in mind. So do something in a way that when it's put out there, you are proud of it. I always say that whatever work you do, if it were to be put on the billboard and you drive past it, you need to be proud of it. And that's how your work will be seen by the people, at a higher level.
Excellent. The point of excellence. I really love the analogy that you always give around your board members. Who are your board members, and make sure that you have those around you. Another point which I think is important to bring in here, because the conversation is coming up quite a lot around women leaders not being great leaders. There are women leaders out there who are exceptional leaders as well. I think I've been privileged to work for a number of them. I still do right now, who actually do amplify. And I think it's also important to acknowledge those who are doing great work, who should continue to do great work. But the other point I want to lift up, Mandisa, is what you just spoke about around excellence. Your work must be excellent in order to be amplified in rooms you don't exist in. It becomes very difficult if someone is not performing, even if you are a female leader. But the expectation is that you will defend. Because I'm female and you're female, you'll defend. I don't think it's fair to have an expectation of leaders to pull you out of the pits of non-performance and still amplify you. So our careers, I think it's important for us to stress here, our personal responsibility. And how you show up is going to help others to actually help lift you up in the spaces that you want to be lifted up to. There is a comment here, and I'd actually like to bring that through to you, Gele, and then to Hope as well. We always see articles that people leave toxic bosses. However, there is also a view of toxic team members. How do you deal a toxic team member who is your direct report?
Sure. Look, I think I had one or two. Difficult one, especially where you find yourself in a space where people have relationships, as in your subordinates have relationships with either your boss or, you know, social capital, you know, for lack of a better word. And often they become toxic in your team, where sometimes you are not even able to express yourself fully or be honest about certain things, or how, you know, some of the things in the environment are impacting you because, you know, they're gonna land somewhere, etc., etc. I'm being honest, Noms. Such people don't last long in my team, and I'm very honest. I always say, you know, if you are not decisive, people are gonna make decisions for you, and if accountability sits with you, then it's you who's gonna be out of the door before before that person. Therefore, you have to make a way for that person to land somewhere else where they can fit better, and that's it, unfortunately. Sounds weird, but that's it.
But how do you do it, Gile? I think practical advice for someone who's experiencing this, you know? So you say like land in another space. What are some of the practical approaches?
9 out of 10 people like that are incompetent.
Fair. Well,
9 out of 10, such people are incompetent, right? You give them tasks, they're unable to deliver, you follow the HR process, you coach, you mentor, you know they're still not gonna do it. Performance manage them, either they go out or they land somewhere, that's it.
got it. Would you like
I
to weigh in
think
there, Hope?
I think the formal process, like Gele is saying, there's structures and people and team interventions, etc., that are set up in an organization to help the line manager and the employee with that. Informally, I think we also need to take bold steps and be able to say, you know what, I was put in this role for a reason as the leader, and the organization must support me. And if I need to create boundaries where you cannot go over the line for whatever reason, and we are very clear and fair about the ways of working, then let's abide by it. And if we don't, then let's also agree how we manage the situation such that everybody is given a fair chance to operate in the system. I also can't be disabled by the system maybe allowing my direct report to go above me. Yeah. Everyone must be enabled, and let's be bold enough to agree. Each play a role, ways of working must be approved, and consequences thereof must also be agreed upon.
Love that. Please do, Mandisa. Of course, yes, please.
I think sometimes when you have a toxic team member, the person who's being toxic is not aware that they're being toxic.
Sure.
It's just, and you have to dig deep to see what has happened in the past for them to be that way. So one of the measures that you can do is to actually make them aware of what the impact of their behavior is having on the entire team. And I think once they are aware, it's either they're going to shape up or they're going to leave, right? So I think it's also up to us as line managers to bring that awareness, to say, you know, your behavior is actually having a negative impact on the entire team, and you need to change. And if you don't, adios.
Sure. So again, it's being comfortable with difficult conversations, right? Because like what you often hear in corporate South Africa specifically, when it comes to performance management, we tend to sometimes shy away from hard conversations where you'll rate someone the middle rating because you're trying to avoid like digging deep and having that conversation. So that's actually great advice, because you have to face it head on, because ultimately it then hurts everyone else in that ecosystem if you don't deal it, because then it looks like you're comfortable as a leader with this kind of behavior, but you expect better behavior from someone else. Whoever's going through this, who posed the question, I hope that you've been able to get guidance around how you can navigate that situation, and I wish you luck with that whole process. I'd like to ask a question now to Neven, Hope, and anyone else who wants to jump in here. How have we actually, because you work globally, how is politics manifesting in different corporate spaces around the world? Or is it a similar trend?
No, I think it's a very similar trend. You know, 100% of the time, 99% of the answers that I get when I ask people about politics, it's negative, it's toxic, it's heartbreaking, it's destructive, it's unnecessary. So I think it's a universally single story. And Chimamanda Adichie's great TED talk, The Danger of a Single Story. It's pretty universal in how we see it. The degree of politicization, well, that's that's organization specific. But I haven't seen huge differences. In fact, the lecture I gave to Stanford 3 weeks ago, this is a group of doctors who are desperate to understand how to deal with politics as a doctor. So it transcends organizations, it transcends cultures, it transcends professions. That said, the most politically astute woman I have ever met was a bunch of women in Abu Dhabi. And it was fascinating. It was during Ramadan. These women were wearing hijabs. One or two had burqas on. Very strict instructions. I couldn't drink or eat in front of them because it was Ramadan. And for me, in South Africa, we've got women in hijabs, a few women in burqas. It's not uncommon in corporate environments. But it was still an alien environment coming from South Africa, as much as we've got many Muslim women. And those women, astonishing. The stuff that I would tell to Western women, to South African women, that would be a revelation. These women were like, yeah, of course I know that. I mean, so we were having much more conversations around how to get better at this, as opposed to the fact of it, the importance of it. The time that I spend with Western women convincing them about stuff that they don't know, these women had it, they knew it. And I thought, I don't know enough about the culture in Abu Dhabi, a Middle Eastern culture, but I thought this was fascinating. Women who, on some level, you would think, okay, so they're suppressed, oppressed. A lot of things that Muslim women will push back against. Just because I wear a hijab does not mean I'm oppressed. They were not. They were anything but. These women were smart political operators. They were the most skilled political operators I've ever seen. In any lecture, in any country, in any organization. It was fascinating.
That is very fascinating. Kele, you want to weigh in?
So Noms, I want to weigh in on that one. Obviously, as you start your career, you work for different organizations, global, local, etc. I think it's a universal language, and I agree with you. But I think for the first time when I actually learned there is something like this, because at that point I didn't know what exactly it is. So we were going through a transition at Anglo American, and one of our new bosses came from London, introduced himself. It was a group of us. The next day, it was a focused conversation. Mandisa brought a very nice portrait to hand over to this man on the day. And all of us were like, oh my word, what was that about, right? And obviously, you would go and say, oh, that's sucking up. That's this, that's that, that's that. Guess what? New structures were announced. Guess what? My lady got a new role. Beautiful. And we were all sitting there like, oh, wow. We created a WhatsApp group, me and two friends. We called it, What Would Ma'am Do?
Oh!
Right?
What would ma'am do?
So in a particular situation, what would ma'am do so that we can, go on to the next step? And I must be honest, I learned a lot from that. And I want to give you a practical example of where I am now, quickly before we run out of time. So when I joined Imperial in 2021, November, 4 months into the game, the DP World acquisition went through, right? Still excited, new in an organization, and I thought, okay, how do I then enable this gateway into Africa through technology and so forth? Now a new player lands, right? That talks about end-to-end supply chain from factory floor to customer door. Obviously, it's not just the tagline that changed. People, relationships, everything. And at that point, I'm obviously still trying to get to a place of impact and influence and delivery and still trying to make myself, visible, call it that, into the organization. Things have changed. Things are moving up and down. People are, still trying to figure out where we're going to land with this whole thing. And I thought very quickly, what would ma'am do? I went to one lady, she was an executive. Unfortunately, she left a few months ago. Said, ma'am, you've got to make sure that I get a seat at the table somewhat. Otherwise, I'm going to disappear. And she said, okay, got you. First time when the bosses landed in South Africa, she said, I'm going to give you a 10-minute thing, walk into my room just to introduce yourself quite quickly. Did that, went well. I got an invitation to dinner. I'm like, okay, right. And at that stage, you don't really realize that you are in the political space. And you basically, we called it, and I'm going to change the term from today in event and call it political capital instead of social capital, because I actually realize now that it was actually political capital that I was creating for myself. And then from then onwards, the guys came, visited. I drove them the whole day in my car from one warehouse to the next, inducting them into what this business, I was new, right? 4 months. Inducting them from one business to the next, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, new structures are in. 1 July 2023, Kele gets this role in sub-Saharan Africa because I had a sponsor. I didn't realize that while people are sitting up there in Dubai talking about who's going to a match, guess what? It was people sitting in the Netherlands who are now talking about me at the table to say, we think she's the fit. And again, Noms, what I did is one of the trips in Dubai, I was intentional. And I said, I'm going to raise my hand. While we were sitting there after dinner, I said, Mister, I hope I am your person in Africa. And he said, got it.
Love it.
4 months later, I am here and I'm proud of myself.
Sure. Ma'am did what ma'am did. Yes. Right? Ma'am learned from what ma'am learned. Ladies, I do have, before we move to closure, there is a question that's come through here from one of our ladies online. I've been trying to move into a new role as I have completely outgrown my current role. However, I have always been doing the other role, and everyone would say I do it well. I just don't have the title. I have been trying to apply. I get told I do well in interviews, but you do not have the experience. This is most discouraging, particularly when they go and get people outside the organization while I am trying to grow and develop internally. What can I do? Please help me. Mandisi and Niven, you look like you both want to help.
No, I think this one is for
hope.
for hope.
Actually.
Yeah.
No, also for you. I'm coming back to.
No, well, look, I mean, I think it's everything that we've spoken about. The fact that you can do the job is not enough. Obviously, you're seeing that. And in fact, you might be in a position where people are taking it for granted. Who is your sponsor? How are you going to get them to help you? I mean, there's been some brilliant examples here. So I think actually I would encourage that person to go back and think on the stuff that we've said, rewatch the recording along with you if they want to. What am I going to do about this? But thinking that I'm good enough at my job and that's going to be enough, we've said it's not enough, you're seeing it's not enough. What are you going to change?
I think the reason why I wanted to come to you is the concept of being invisible.
Yeah.
And actually wanting to lift yourself out of being invisible. Because it's clear that I think they're invisible. So how do I become less invisible, Hope?
You gotta be bold. I had someone, and I'll protect them. I had someone coming to my office yesterday. And they came to the office and they said, how do I make myself visible? Sure. And I said, to who? Because we're going through changes at the moment. How do I make myself visible? And immediately my head was, it's visibility outside of our team. And the person said, no, I'm saying, how do I make myself visible to you?
Oh, wow.
Sure.
To you, Mandisa. So that's really kind of like had an impact on me. And it's all about they've been in a particular role for a very long time. And there's I think, a tendency for us to put a person in a box. And what they've been doing, they've been also doing the person has been doing other courses, to uplift themselves. And I've actually provided an environment where the person can actually go and work with other teams without really impacting what they do for me.
Yeah.
And this question came as a result of them seeing someone else being given a role that they thought they could perhaps do it. And my response to that person is, it's not about making yourself visible only to me, but make yourself visible to the person, the hiring manager as well. I can do my part, but they also need to see what value do you bring And perhaps what you're doing is not enough. You need to take a much more full responsibility for a project and implement it end to end. Because what they've been doing is just doing bits of a project. And if you're doing bits of a project, sometimes it's not easy for people to see your value and the contribution that you bring in. So yeah, so sometimes we see things from far, but when a person say, how do I make myself visible to me? You have to be able to kind of articulate that.
That was actually a very powerful example, and I hope it's helped our audience member today. Hope?
You have to be bold. You really have to be bold and intentional about what you're doing. The most memorable interviews I've had where somebody walks in and they say, I'm the person for this job. And I'm going to show you how I'm the person for this job. Even I have to be like, oh, I gotta listen, because how dare you come in and say I'm the person for this job? But it's memorable and it makes you listen. And even where we facilitated career mobility, the most memorable are where someone comes from a very different field and says, I've assessed 1, 2, 3, 4. This is what I can do. Here's my proposal, and here's how I'm going to do it, and the result that you're going to see. That's what people want to see. So we often think as we talk and say, I am able to do 1, 2, 3, 4, it's showing the results. It's not. And the way that I understand my work doesn't mean that it's landing with Niven, because Niven is looking with a different lens. Kelly is looking with a different lens. It's probably not landing with Kelly. And in assessing all of those, I must make it land in a way that grabs Kelly's attention. Bold and intentional.
100%. I love that. More questions coming through. I think before I wrap, I will take this question and then we can actually wrap. How do I go about finding and asking someone within my organization to be my mentor and sponsor? And what objectives should be set as a minimum for these discussions? I have a view, but Skillet, I'll let you go first.
I think first you need to have a goal, Noms, in terms of what you want to achieve, because it's really difficult for someone to assist you if you really don't know what you're looking for, right? And I'm sure one would, often we identify people that we admire in organizations, be it from a position of power, authority, or call it the change that they've brought in the organization, etc. For me, it boils down to one thing. I always say I've got nothing to lose. At Exaro, when I worked there, I walked into one of the executives' offices because I felt he's gonna help me go, right? The PA was not impressed, but I walked in and the guy said, pull a chair, sit there, what do you want? And I said what I wanted. And that's how I progressed in my career. Unfortunately, mine was sponsored by men in the main, and I always had that courage to go in. It's only now in Imperial when I joined that I had a female that I had guts to say, I think she's been doing well in the male-dominated industry, and I really want to excel here. Let me go to her. And it worked. Yeah.
I just want to weigh in here, and I think Niven spoke about your strategy. What is your strategy? You need to be clear in terms of what you are trying to achieve. Before you go and approach someone, I always speak about your 30-second elevator pitch. If you can't give a 30-second elevator pitch in terms of what your objectives are, it makes it very difficult. Because then we continuously ask for coffees, and people will grant you a coffee because we want to help. But if you're going to get a 30-minute slot and then we're looking at each other's eyes and asking how we're doing, it defeats the objectives that you're trying to achieve. Be very clear when you actually want to reach out to someone, because it's usually wanting to tap into someone you admire, like Kelly rightfully said right now. You never just randomly want to reach out to someone without a clear purpose of what you want to talk about, because nobody has infinite time. So you need to be clear on that. Sponsorship is about people who speak about you in rooms that you are not in. Usually it helps if your manager's manager knows your name. And again, it pulls into what Mandisa said earlier about excellence. Show up with excellence so that your work also speaks for itself while you're equally being bold, like Hope has said. All of these things will transcend in you being able to get sponsorship. And number one. Number two, if you identify someone, like Gela just gave the example, that you admire and would like to learn something from, be clear on what it is you are trying to achieve from having engagements with that individual. On that note, as we land, I'd like to give my panelists an opportunity. Think of your 25-year-old self and you right now. With the discussion we've just had here today, what advice would you give them about navigating their careers in corporate politics? Mandisa, you
I
first.
would have started bragging about my work then.
Yes,
I always had this notion of, my work would speak for me, but I think I needed to have been bold. I think if I had been bold, maybe I would have been the CEO of some company or president of South Africa for that matter. But I think the important lesson for me is I need to be much more bold. Well, I should have been much more bold at that age to advance even further.
Love it. Speak up about the great work that you're doing. Thank you so much, Mandisa. Vivin.
I think the advice I took at 25 is advice I'm still taking now at 50. That careers, lives are much more about zigzag paths to personal fulfillment than they are these clear steps up a ladder. I read that when I started my first job, my first professional job, and I thought, I think that's right. And so for me, it's never been there. It has been a zigzag path, and personal fulfillment matters. Yes, you've got to pay the bills, but what do you wake up in the morning to do? Keep asking about that.
Love that. Thank you. Hope?
I would have worked on getting a sponsor much earlier and different sponsors. That board of directors, I would have worked on that much earlier.
Thank you very much. Gele?
I think for me, it's about times it gets tiring, but when it does, you must still remember what the purpose is, right? I always say, I love tats, but I don't just do tats. I've got a tat here. Every time I look at it, it says, courage, dear heart, steadfast, my soul. That's it.
Love, 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 love that. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but this has been a wonderful experience. I think I take away so much of the nuggets that have actually been shared here today. But most importantly, what I'd like to leave us all with today, because I think this is something we must all go away and ponder on. Most of the people at work are either allies or adversaries. Do you understand people's views of supporting you or not supporting you? How many times do we assume we know the answers? Invisible contributions have no value. Be visible. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the privilege of your time. We wish you a wonderful day further, and thank you for joining us today.